What if I told you that your financial struggles aren't actually about money at all, but about an invisible programming running in the background of your mind that you never even knew existed? But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. You didn't stumble upon this video by accident. Right now, as you're listening to these words, there's a part of you that's exhausted from operating within the same inherited economic thinking patterns that have kept you stuck for years. Your subconscious mind guided you here because it recognizes something profound, the urgent need for complete financial transformation that goes far deeper than budgeting tips or investment strategies. Has this ever happened to you? You work hard. You follow all the conventional financial advice. Maybe you even repeat positive affirmations about money, yet somehow you find yourself trapped in the same cycles of scarcity, anxiety, and limitation. You might earn more money only to mysteriously lose it, or you find yourself sabotaging opportunities just when success seems within reach. Sound familiar? Here's what most people don't understand about wealth creation. It's not about learning new techniques or finding better opportunities. The real battle for financial freedom is happening in the hidden recesses of your mind, where unconscious beliefs about money, success, and worthiness are quietly determining every financial decision you make. What you're about to discover might surprise you, but the most successful people in the world don't just think differently about money. They've actually reprogrammed their entire neurological response to wealth and abundance. They've learned to eliminate the deep-seated programming that tells most of us that money is somehow dirty, that wealthy people are corrupt, or that spiritual people should remain poor. This isn't about temporary motivation through positive thinking or repeating mantras you don't truly believe. Those approaches fail because they're trying to paint over rust instead of removing it completely. What we're talking about is something far more powerful, a complete structural reconfiguration of how your brain processes financial reality. Stay with me until the end of this video because I'm going to show you the exact neuroplasticity techniques that can literally rewire your brain's relationship with money. We'll explore how childhood experiences created invisible financial boundaries in your mind, why your family's money story is still controlling your bank account, and most importantly, how to break free from these inherited limitations once and for all. The fascinating truth is that abundance isn't something you need to chase or attract, it's actually your natural state. But somewhere along the way, layer upon layer of limiting beliefs, cultural programming, and inherited scarcity mindset have covered up this innate capacity for prosperity. It's like having a powerful sports car with the parking brake on. The engine is fine, but something invisible is preventing you from accessing your full potential. Throughout history, certain individuals have discovered how to remove these mental barriers and align themselves with what the ancient traditions called the logos, the intelligent principle that governs universal abundance. They understood that wealth creation isn't about manipulation or exploitation, but about becoming a clear channel for value creation and service. But here's where it gets really interesting, and why this information is so crucial right now. The old economic paradigms are crumbling, and those who understand how to reprogram their financial consciousness will thrive, while those trapped in outdated money beliefs will struggle more than ever. If insights like these resonate with your journey toward financial consciousness, hit that subscribe button. You're clearly someone who values depth over surface-level advice, and this channel is designed for people exactly like you who are ready to transform their relationship with money from the inside out. So, the question becomes, are you ready to discover what's really been blocking your financial success? And more importantly, are you prepared to do the deep work necessary to transform your relationship with money from the inside out? Because what comes next might challenge everything you thought you knew about wealth, spirituality, and success. Let's start by dismantling one of the most destructive myths that's been sabotaging your financial success from behind the scenes. Deep in your subconscious mind, there's likely a belief that's been quietly operating since childhood. The idea that money is somehow inherently dirty, corrupt, or spiritually contaminating. This isn't your fault. From the moment you could understand language, you've been exposed to countless messages that painted wealth as morally suspicious. Think about it. How many times have you heard phrases like, money is the root of all evil, or rich people are greedy, or you can't be spiritual and wealthy at the same time? These aren't just casual observations. They're programming statements that have been shaping your neural pathways for decades. The hidden truth is that this programming didn't emerge naturally. It was systematically installed through misunderstood religious teachings, cultural conditioning, and societal narratives that have been passed down through generations, like an invisible inheritance of limitation. The original spiritual texts never condemned wealth itself. They warned against the attachment and obsession that can corrupt the soul. There's a massive difference between having money and being enslaved by it. But here's where this gets fascinating from a transformation perspective. When you believe at a cellular level that money is dirty, your nervous system literally rejects financial abundance as a form of self-protection. Your subconscious mind interprets wealth as a threat to your moral identity, so it unconsciously sabotages every opportunity for prosperity. You might work incredibly hard, make all the right decisions, but something always goes wrong just before you break through to the next level. This internal conflict creates what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, the painful tension between wanting financial freedom and believing that desire makes you somehow less pure or spiritual. The impact of this hidden programming is devastating because it operates completely below conscious awareness. You can repeat affirmations all day long, but if your deeper mind associates money with corruption, those positive statements will feel false and eventually be rejected. Now, I want to go even deeper into this revelation because understanding the true nature of wealth is absolutely crucial for your journey forward. The reality is that money is nothing more than a neutral technology, a tool for exchanging value between human beings. It has no inherent moral quality whatsoever. Money doesn't make decisions, it doesn't choose to be used for good or evil, and it certainly doesn't have the power to corrupt anyone who wasn't already corruptible. What actually happens is that money amplifies who you already are. If you're a generous person, wealth gives you greater capacity for generosity. If you're focused on service, financial resources expand your ability to serve. If you're committed to making a positive impact in the world, money becomes the vehicle that transforms your vision into reality. This is why the most spiritually evolved individuals throughout history understood that rejecting abundance isn't virtuous. It's actually a form of spiritual bypassing that prevents you from fulfilling your highest purpose. True integrity isn't about remaining small and financially struggling. It's about becoming wealthy enough to fund your dreams, support your family, and contribute meaningfully to causes you care about. The moment you release this toxic programming about money's supposed dirtiness, something extraordinary happens in your consciousness. The internal resistance that's been blocking your financial flow simply dissolves, and you begin to see opportunities that were always there but invisible to your conditioned mind. You start making decisions from a place of empowerment rather than fear, and the external world begins to mirror this internal transformation. Write in the comments, "I choose wealth with integrity," if you're ready to release these old beliefs and step into your true financial potential. But let's dig even deeper into where these destructive beliefs about money actually originated, because the revelations here will completely shift your perspective on wealth and spirituality. The truth is, many of the religious teachings that have been used to justify financial limitation were never intended to condemn prosperity at all. They were systematically misinterpreted over centuries to serve entirely different agendas. Take one of the most quoted passages in Christianity: "The love of money is the root of all evil." This single sentence has probably done more damage to people's financial potential than any other statement in human history. But here's what's absolutely mind-blowing. St. Paul never said money was evil. He specifically said the love of money, meaning the obsessive attachment that transforms money from a tool into an idol, that consumes your entire identity. The original context of Paul's warning was about disordered attachment, when someone becomes so fixated on accumulating wealth that they lose sight of their higher purpose and begin treating money as their god. This is completely different from having money and using it wisely. Paul was addressing the psychological trap of allowing material possessions to define your worth, and, meaning, not condemning the responsible acquisition of resources. This distinction is absolutely crucial for your mindset transformation because it reveals how centuries of misinterpretation have created false guilt around financial success. When you understand that the warning was about unhealthy obsession rather than wealth itself, you can pursue prosperity without feeling like you're betraying your spiritual values. Even more fascinating is the wisdom found in ancient Jewish teachings, particularly in the Talmud, where money is understood as an extension of human energy that can be channeled toward good or evil, depending on the consciousness of the person wielding it. The rabbinical perspective recognizes that divine blessing actually enriches people, making prosperity a potential expression of spiritual alignment when it's accompanied by justice and generosity. This ancient understanding treats wealth as a form of stewardship rather than ownership. The resources that flow into your life aren't really yours. They're temporarily under your management, and how you handle them reflects your level of spiritual maturity. From this perspective, rejecting abundance isn't virtuous. It's actually rejecting the opportunity to serve as a conscious steward of resources that could benefit many people. If this conversation sparked something meaningful for you, that like button is more than just a click. It's your way of saying this message found the right person at the right time. Your engagement helps ensure content like this reaches others who need these insights. The hidden truth behind these ancient teachings is that money becomes problematic only when it's hoarded selfishly or pursued through exploitation and harm. But when wealth is generated through genuine value creation and circulated with wisdom and compassion, it becomes a vehicle for expressing divine principles in the material world. This revelation completely transforms the relationship between spirituality and financial success. Instead of seeing them as opposing forces, you begin to understand that conscious wealth creation is actually a spiritual practice. Every ethical business decision, every fair transaction, every generous act funded by your abundance becomes an expression of higher consciousness operating through material reality. The impact of embracing this perspective is profound because it eliminates the internal conflict that's been sabotaging your financial growth. When you realize that accumulating resources responsibly isn't a betrayal of your values, but an expansion of your capacity to live those values, everything changes. You stop apologizing for wanting financial freedom and start approaching wealth building as a sacred responsibility. Now, I want to explore how this ancient wisdom connects to modern neuroscience and the actual mechanics of how beliefs shape your financial reality, because the journey into understanding your mind's hidden programming reveals even more surprising truths about why some people effortlessly attract abundance while others struggle despite their best efforts. Write in the comments, "Ancient wisdom guides me," if these revelations are resonating with your own spiritual journey toward financial empowerment. What's happening behind the scenes in your psyche when you resist financial abundance is even more complex and fascinating than most people realize. There's a hidden psychological mechanism that actually makes Financial struggle feels safer and more virtuous than prosperity, and understanding this revelation is crucial for breaking free from unconscious self-sabotage. Here's the uncomfortable truth that most people never examine. When you view money as inherently contaminated or corrupt, it becomes a perfect psychological defense mechanism. If you don't have money, you can automatically feel morally superior to those who do, without ever having to confront your own frustration, powerlessness, or fear of taking real responsibility for your financial situation. This defensive structure is incredibly seductive because it allows you to maintain a sense of purity and righteousness while avoiding the vulnerable work of actually building wealth. You can say things like, "I don't do that for money," or "I'm poor but honest," and feel spiritually elevated, even though these statements are often masking deeper feelings of inadequacy or terror about stepping into your full potential. The psychological impact of this mindset is devastating because it creates what researchers call learned helplessness around money. Instead of seeing financial challenges as problems to solve, you begin to see them as evidence of your moral superiority. Your struggling becomes your identity, and any movement toward prosperity feels like a betrayal of who you think you are. But here's where the transformation really begins, when you understand that money itself is completely neutral technology. Money has absolutely no consciousness, no intentions, no moral agency whatsoever. It doesn't choose to be used for good or evil any more than a hammer chooses to build houses or break windows. Money is simply a sophisticated tool for storing and exchanging value between human beings. This perspective shift is revolutionary because it removes all the emotional charge and moral judgment from wealth building. You stop asking yourself whether wanting money makes you a good or bad person, and you start asking much more practical questions. How can I create genuine value for others? What problems can I solve? How can I exchange my skills and knowledge for resources that allow me to live with greater freedom and impact? The hidden truth is that every moral judgment you've placed on money has been a projection of human consciousness onto an inanimate system. Money doesn't corrupt people. It simply amplifies and reveals what was already present in their character. A generous person becomes more generous. With resources, a selfish person becomes more selfish. A person committed to service gains greater capacity to serve. When you truly internalize this understanding, something profound happens in your relationship with wealth. The internal resistance dissolves because you're no longer fighting against something you perceive as morally threatening. Instead, you begin to see money as what it actually is, a powerful tool that can accelerate whatever positive impact you want to create in the world. The journey toward financial empowerment becomes less about overcoming your resistance to money and more about clarifying your values and intentions. What matters isn't whether you have money, but how consciously and ethically you generate, manage, and circulate it. The technology itself is completely neutral. The consciousness you bring to it determines whether it becomes a force for creation or destruction in your life. This shift in perspective opens up entirely new possibilities for how you approach wealth building, because you're no longer operating from a place of guilt, fear, or moral confusion. You can pursue financial success with the same clarity and integrity you'd bring to any other important goal in your life. Now, I want to reveal how these psychological patterns get embedded so deeply in your nervous system during childhood, and why traditional approaches to changing your money mindset rarely work at the level where real transformation needs to happen. Write in the comments, "Money is neutral technology," if you're experiencing this shift in perspective and ready to approach wealth building from a place of clarity rather than confusion. The most insidious part of this financial programming is how it operates completely beneath conscious awareness, disguising itself as noble choices while systematically sabotaging your economic potential. You might think you're making rational career decisions or ethical business choices, but the hidden truth is that unworthiness programming is quietly steering your life toward financial limitation. This shows up in countless ways that seem perfectly logical on the surface. The talented teacher who refuses to ask for a salary increase because education should be about service, not money. The gifted artist who consistently undercharges for their work because asking for fair compensation feels somehow greedy or materialistic. The skilled entrepreneur who deliberately keeps their business small to avoid appearing too successful or ambitious. What's happening behind the scenes is that these individuals have internalized the belief that their worthiness as human beings is somehow connected to their financial struggle. They've unconsciously equated moral purity with economic limitation. So every movement toward prosperity triggers an internal alarm system that says, "This isn't who you're supposed to be." The impact of this programming becomes even more apparent when people actually do receive significant amounts of money unexpectedly. Instead of feeling grateful or empowered, they experience intense guilt and anxiety, as if they're carrying around something toxic that needs to be eliminated as quickly as possible. There's an almost compulsive urge to spend the money rapidly, not because they need the items they're purchasing, but because holding on to wealth feels emotionally unbearable. This phenomenon reveals something profound about how deeply these beliefs are embedded in your nervous system. It's not just intellectual understanding that money is neutral. Your body literally rejects financial abundance as if it were a foreign substance that threatens your identity. The money feels heavy, burdensome, almost radioactive in its symbolic contamination. The psychological mechanism behind this is fascinating because it operates like an immune system response. Just as your body might reject a transplanted organ that could save your life, your conditioned mind rejects financial abundance that could dramatically improve your circumstances. The programming is so strong that it overrides rational thinking and long-term planning in favor of maintaining familiar patterns of limitation. Consider subscribing if you want to continue this exploration of conscious wealth creation. The people who find value in content like this are the ones who understand that true financial transformation requires more than just tips and tricks. It requires rewiring your entire relationship with abundance. What makes this particularly tragic is that many of the most conscious, caring, creative people in our society are the ones most affected by this programming. The individuals who could use financial resources to create positive change in the world are often the same ones who've been conditioned to view wealth as spiritually contaminating. Meanwhile, people with fewer scruples about money accumulation face no internal resistance to building fortunes. The journey toward breaking free from this conditioning requires recognizing that your seemingly rational decisions around money are often being driven by unconscious programming installed decades ago. That voice in your head telling you to charge less, work for free, or avoid scaling your business isn't wisdom, it's trauma response disguised as virtue. Understanding this hidden dynamic is crucial because it explains why traditional approaches to financial improvement often fail. You can read all the investment books in the world, learn every money management technique, and develop the most sophisticated business strategies. But if your deeper mind is programmed to reject wealth as morally threatening, you'll unconsciously sabotage every opportunity for success. The transformation begins when you start questioning the real motivation behind your financial choices. Are you keeping your prices low because you genuinely want to serve people, or because charging appropriately feels dangerous to your identity? Are you avoiding business growth because you prefer simplicity, or because success triggers deep fears about becoming someone you've been taught to distrust? Now, I want to explore how this programming gets so deeply embedded during childhood that it literally becomes part of your neurological wiring, and why simply thinking positive thoughts about money rarely creates lasting change at the cellular level where these patterns are actually stored. Write in the comments, "I Recognize the pattern if you're starting to see how unworthiness programming has been influencing your own financial decisions without you realizing it. The roots of your financial programming run much deeper than most people realize, extending back to your earliest childhood experiences when your brain was literally being wired to understand how money works in the world. Before you were even old enough to count coins or understand the concept of earning, your developing nervous system was already absorbing thousands of subtle and not so subtle messages about scarcity, limitation, and economic reality. Think about this for a moment. By the time you reach school age, you had probably heard the word no associated with money thousands of times. No, we can't afford that. No, that's too expensive. No, money doesn't grow on trees. Each of these seemingly innocent responses wasn't just providing information, it was literally sculpting the neural pathways that would determine your adult relationship with abundance. What makes this programming so powerful is that it occurred during the most neuroplastic period of your entire life. Your childhood brain wasn't designed to analyze and evaluate information rationally. It was engineered to absorb relational and emotional patterns with incredible efficiency. When a child repeatedly experiences tension, stress, or disappointment around money, those emotional states become hardwired into their understanding of how financial reality operates. The hidden truth is that your developing mind didn't process these experiences as temporary circumstances or revisable data points. Instead, it encoded them as fundamental laws of nature, similar to learning that fire is hot or water is wet. If you heard for years that money is always lacking, always difficult to obtain, or always associated with stress and conflict, your brain created high-resistance synaptic connections that treat scarcity as an immutable fact rather than a changeable condition. This neurological programming becomes the invisible operating system running your adult financial decisions. You're not consciously choosing to limit your income or sabotage opportunities. You're simply following the deeply embedded instructions that were installed during your most formative years. Your nervous system is literally wired to expect and recreate the financial patterns you witnessed and absorbed as a child. The impact of this early conditioning extends far beyond your bank account balance. It shapes how you perceive opportunities, what risks you're willing to take, how you value your own contributions, and even what you believe is possible for someone like you. These aren't conscious beliefs that you can simply think your way out of. They're embedded in your autonomic nervous system at a level that operates below conscious awareness. What's particularly fascinating is how this programming gets reinforced through something called confirmation bias. Once your brain is wired to expect financial limitation, it automatically filters reality to confirm that expectation. You notice every story of economic struggle, but miss countless examples of people creating abundance. You remember every financial disappointment, but forget instances when money flowed easily. Your attention system becomes calibrated to validate the scarcity programming rather than challenge it. This explains why traditional approaches to changing your money mindset often feel so ineffective. You're trying to override decades of neurological conditioning with positive thinking and affirmations, but the deeper programming is operating at a much more fundamental level. It's like trying to change the direction of a river by thinking positive thoughts about water. The current is too strong, and the channels are too deeply carved to respond to surface-level interventions. The journey toward true financial transformation requires working at the same neurological level where the original programming was installed. You need to access the neuroplasticity that created these patterns in the first place, and consciously guide it toward new configurations that support abundance rather than limitation. Now, I want to reveal the specific techniques that can actually rewire these deep patterns by leveraging your brain's natural capacity for change, because understanding the neuroscience behind financial programming opens up entirely new possibilities for creating lasting transformation. Write in the comments, ready to rewire, if you're beginning to understand how deep this childhood programming goes and you're committed to doing the work necessary to change it at the neurological level. The revelations about financial programming become even more profound when you discover that this conditioning isn't just psychological or neurological. It's actually being passed down through your genetic expression in ways that scientists are only beginning to understand. Recent breakthrough research in epigenetics has revealed something absolutely mind-blowing. Sustained economic stress in one generation can literally leave biochemical marks on the DNA that get transmitted to the next generation. Hit that like button if you felt a shift in how you think about money and consciousness during our time together. There's real energy in that simple action that supports both your own transformation and helps this message find others who are ready for it. This means the financial trauma your parents or grandparents experienced during economic hardships, job losses, or periods of intense scarcity didn't just affect their own lives. It created biological changes that were passed down to you at the cellular level. You may be carrying the physiological imprint of economic stress that occurred decades before you were even born, encoded into your very genetic expression. The hidden truth is that scarcity isn't just inherited as stories, beliefs, or family narratives. It's transmitted as emotional biology. Your nervous system's hypersensitivity to financial risk, your tendency to expect economic catastrophe, or your compulsive need to hoard resources might not be character flaws or personal weaknesses. They could be biological survival mechanisms that were adaptive for previous generations but are now limiting your potential in completely different circumstances. This biological inheritance combines with powerful cultural programming that reinforces these limiting patterns across entire societies. In cultures with high uncertainty avoidance, which includes many traditional communities, there's an overwhelming preference for security over opportunity, continuity over change, and predictability over expansion. The fear of losing what you have far exceeds any confidence in your ability to gain something better. These cultural values get embedded so deeply into family systems that they become invisible operating principles passed down through generations. Parents who lived through economic upheaval naturally develop protective strategies focused on avoiding risk rather than pursuing possibility. They create family maxims like, "A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush," or "Don't put all your eggs in one basket," that sound like wisdom but actually function as inhibitors to growth and expansion. The impact of this cultural conditioning is that entire family lineages develop what researchers call scarcity inheritance, unconscious agreements to prioritize survival over thriving, safety over abundance, and limitation over possibility. Children absorb these values so completely that they feel like natural instincts rather than learned behaviors, making them incredibly resistant to change, even when circumstances have completely shifted. What makes this particularly challenging is that questioning these inherited patterns can feel like betraying your family's wisdom or dishonoring the struggles of previous generations. There's often intense guilt around wanting more than your parents had or pursuing opportunities they couldn't access. Breaking free from generational limitation programming requires not just personal transformation, but a kind of ancestral healing that honors the past while claiming your right to a different future. The journey toward financial liberation becomes much more complex when you understand these deeper layers of conditioning, because you're not just changing your own mind. You're potentially breaking patterns that have been reinforced for generations. The resistance you feel when trying to think bigger or pursue greater abundance isn't just personal fear. It's the weight of ancestral programming designed to keep you safely within familiar limitations. Understanding the biological and cultural depth of financial programming is crucial because it explains why surface-level techniques rarely create lasting change. You're working against not just your own conditioning, but generations of survival-based decision-making that's been encoded into your cellular memory and cultural identity. Now, I want to explore how this generational programming manifests in the specific language patterns and internal dialogue that continuously reinforce limitation, because the words you use to think about money are literally shaping your financial reality in ways most people never recognize. Write in the comments, breaking generational patterns, if you're recognizing how deep these inherited limitations go, and you're committed to being the one who transforms these patterns for future generations. The psychological complexity of breaking free from financial limitation becomes even more intricate when you understand the powerful role of family loyalty in maintaining economic patterns. Your brain is fundamentally wired for social survival, which means it will almost always choose belonging over individual advancement when it perceives those two forces as being in conflict. This creates a fascinating and often heartbreaking dynamic where people unconsciously sabotage their own financial success to maintain their position within the family system. The moment your income starts to significantly exceed what your parents or siblings earn, an internal alarm system activates that warns you about the danger of standing out too much or appearing to think you're better than everyone else. The hidden truth is that many people who seem to struggle with money management or career advancement are actually highly skilled at maintaining family equilibrium. They've unconsciously learned to keep their financial success within acceptable boundaries to avoid triggering envy, resentment, or the terrifying possibility of emotional exile from the people they love most. This shows up in countless subtle ways that appear completely rational on the surface. The promotion you didn't pursue because it would require relocating away from family. The business opportunity you passed up because it felt too risky or ambitious. The tendency to downplay your achievements or hide your financial progress when you're around relatives who are struggling. Each of these decisions might seem prudent individually, but collectively they reveal a pattern of unconscious self-limitation driven by loyalty to the family's economic comfort zone. The impact of this dynamic extends far beyond individual financial outcomes because it perpetuates limitation across generations. When successful family members feel compelled to hide their progress or deliberately underachieve to maintain peace, they're not just limiting themselves. They're reinforcing the family belief that significant financial success is somehow dangerous or inappropriate for people like them. This pattern is further strengthened by the profound social taboo surrounding money conversations in most cultures. Few topics provoke as much immediate discomfort and nervousness as discussing personal finances, even among close friends and family members. Asking someone about their income, debt levels, or financial goals is considered such a transgression that it's often compared to invading the most intimate areas of privacy. This systematic silence around money creates what amounts to a culture of functional financial illiteracy, where people navigate one of the most important aspects of adult life with virtually no shared knowledge, wisdom, or support. Unlike other crucial life skills that are discussed openly and learned through community, financial competence is expected to develop in isolation through trial and error, with minimal guidance or feedback. The hidden consequence of this silence is that most people have no accurate understanding of what normal financial patterns actually look like. They don't know whether their spending, saving, or earning patterns are typical, problematic, or exemplary, because these topics are shrouded in secrecy. This creates an environment where financial shame thrives and money mistakes are repeated endlessly because the knowledge needed to make better decisions is trapped in individual experience rather than shared communally. The transformation journey requires recognizing how these twin forces of family loyalty and social silence work together to maintain financial limitation. Breaking free isn't just about changing your own beliefs and behaviors. It's about developing the courage to step outside both family expectations and cultural taboos around money conversations. Now, I want to reveal how this culture of financial silence intersects with spiritual beliefs to create one of the most psychologically complex barriers to wealth that exists in modern consciousness, because the intersection of money shame and spiritual identity creates patterns that are incredibly difficult to recognize and even harder to change. Write in the comments, ready to break the silence, if you're recognizing how family, loyalty, and social taboos have been keeping you financially limited, and you're prepared to have more honest conversations about money. This culture of financial silence becomes even more damaging when you realize it's systematically reinforced by our educational institutions, which deliberately avoid teaching the practical money skills that every adult desperately needs. The hidden truth is that our formal education system trains people to be financially dependent rather than financially empowered, creating generations of adults who can solve complex mathematical equations but have no idea how to negotiate their salary, protect their capital from inflation, or make strategic investment decisions. If you're someone who appreciates content that bridges spirituality, psychology, and practical wealth building, I'd love to have you as part of this community. Subscribe to make sure you don't miss the deeper conversations that can actually shift your financial reality at the foundational level. Think about this for a moment. You can graduate from high school, even college, having spent thousands of hours studying abstract mathematical formulas, historical dates, and theoretical concepts, but never learning how to read a contract, understand compound interest, or evaluate whether a financial opportunity is legitimate or predatory. This isn't an oversight. It's a systematic omission that keeps people financially vulnerable and dependent on institutions that profit from their ignorance. The impact of this educational gap is devastating because it forces people to learn crucial financial skills through trial and error, often during the most vulnerable periods of their lives. Young adults enter the workforce with massive student debt but no understanding of how debt actually works. They sign contracts they can't interpret, accept job offers without knowing how to evaluate them, and make financial decisions based on intuition and inherited beliefs rather than actual knowledge. This educational void intersects powerfully with religious and spiritual conditioning that often presents an even more complex barrier to financial empowerment. While some modern spiritual movements have begun addressing money from a conscious prosperity perspective, the vast majority of religious traditions still maintain a structural bias that positions spiritual and economic concerns as fundamentally opposed to each other. The hidden consequence of this religious programming is that many of the most conscious, caring, and spiritually oriented people in our society have been conditioned to view financial success as evidence of spiritual failure. They've internalized the belief that truly enlightened individuals should somehow transcend material concerns, living in a state of detached simplicity that borders on deliberate poverty. This creates an incredibly painful internal conflict for people who want to serve others and create positive change in the world, because they've been taught that wanting the resources necessary to fund their mission somehow diminishes their spiritual authenticity. They find themselves torn between their desire to make a meaningful impact and their fear that pursuing financial abundance will corrupt their pure intentions. The psychological complexity of this programming is that it disguises spiritual bypassing as virtue. Rather than developing a mature, integrated relationship with money as a tool for service, people learn to reject financial empowerment as a form of spiritual superiority. They convince themselves that struggling financially is somehow more pure or enlightened than building wealth consciously and using it responsibly. What makes this particularly tragic is that many of the world's problems could be solved much more effectively if spiritually conscious people had greater access to financial resources. The environmental crisis, social inequality, educational gaps, and countless other challenges require funding to address properly. When the people most committed to solving these problems have been conditioned to reject wealth, they inadvertently limit their own capacity to create the change they desperately want to see. The journey toward integrated spiritual and financial consciousness requires recognizing that this opposition between money and spirituality isn't divinely ordained. It's a human construction that serves to keep transformational resources concentrated in the hands of people who may not use them for the highest good. Now, I want to explore how this spiritual conditioning combines with quantum consciousness principles to either accelerate or completely block your ability to manifest financial abundance, because understanding the deeper mechanics of reality creation reveals why some people effortlessly attract wealth, while others struggle despite their best intentions. Write in the comments, integrating spirit and money, if you're ready to heal this false separation and use financial abundance as a vehicle for spiritual service rather than seeing them as opposing forces. The transformation toward financial and spiritual integration begins with what I call breaking the silence conspiracy, the courageous act of speaking about money with the same openness and maturity you'd bring to any other important aspect of life. This isn't just about sharing personal financial information. It's about recognizing that your ability to engage consciously with the material world is actually a reflection of your spiritual development, not a contradiction to it. Speaking about money freely becomes an act of emotional maturity because it requires you to move beyond the shame, fear, and conditioning that keeps most people trapped in financial unconsciousness. When you can discuss your financial goals, challenges, and strategies without guilt or embarrassment, you're demonstrating that you've integrated this crucial aspect of human existence rather than compartmentalizing it as somehow separate from your authentic self. The hidden truth is that you cannot be truly integral while living dissociated from the system that regulates material energy in our world. Pretending that money doesn't matter, or that spiritual people shouldn't concern themselves with financial reality, is actually a form of spiritual bypassing that prevents you from developing the full spectrum of consciousness necessary for effective service in the world. This conspiracy of silence serves to maintain the concentration of financial power among people who have no qualms about discussing, studying, and strategically working with money, while keeping more conscious individuals on the sidelines, struggling financially and therefore limited in their capacity to create positive change. Breaking this silence becomes an act of social democratization because it spreads financial knowledge and empowerment beyond the traditional power structures. But perhaps the most insidious aspect of spiritual financial conditioning is what can only be described as the spiritual martyr archetype, the deeply embedded belief that authentic spiritual seekers, genuine sages, and truly enlightened beings must be poor. This conviction operates as a structural bias throughout contemporary spiritual culture, automatically equating material abundance with spiritual corruption or inauthenticity. The psychological impact of this archetype is devastating because it creates an impossible choice for spiritually oriented people. You can either be wealthy or enlightened, successful or authentic, but not both. This false dichotomy forces people to choose between their material well-being and their spiritual identity, creating internal conflicts that guarantee neither true prosperity nor genuine spiritual development. What makes this programming so persistent is that it's often reinforced by spiritual teachers and communities who themselves have bought into the poverty equals purity mythology. Students learn that having nice things, living comfortably, or building financial security somehow indicates a lack of spiritual advancement or attachment to material illusions. The hidden consequence of this belief system is that it systematically removes financially empowered, conscious individuals from positions where they could use their resources to support spiritual growth, environmental healing, social justice, and consciousness expansion. Meanwhile, people with fewer spiritual qualms about wealth accumulation end up controlling the majority of resources, often using them in ways that perpetuate unconsciousness rather than evolution. The journey toward breaking free from the spiritual martyr archetype requires recognizing that voluntary poverty and involuntary financial struggle are completely different phenomena. True spiritual renunciation comes from a position of choice and abundance, not from conditioning that equates worthiness with limitation. When you're financially empowered, you can choose simplicity from freedom rather than being forced into it by unconscious programming. Understanding this archetype is crucial because it reveals why so many spiritually gifted people remain financially disempowered despite their knowledge, skills, and good intentions. They're unconsciously following a script that demands they sacrifice their material well-being to maintain their spiritual identity, not realizing that this sacrifice actually limits their capacity to serve the very values they hold most dear. Now, I want to reveal how these spiritual and psychological patterns intersect with the quantum mechanics of consciousness to either support or sabotage your ability to create financial abundance. Because the deeper you understand how reality actually responds to consciousness, the more obvious it becomes why traditional approaches to money manifestation produce such inconsistent results. Write in the comments, choosing spiritual abundance. If you're ready to reject the martyrdom model and embrace wealth as a vehicle for conscious service rather than evidence of spiritual failure. Understanding the true historical context of religious poverty reveals just how dramatically we've misinterpreted the spiritual teachings that have shaped our modern relationship with money. The reality is that when early Christians and medieval monastics practiced voluntary poverty, it wasn't the individual misery and financial struggle that we see glamorized in contemporary spiritual circles. It was actually a sophisticated, community-sustained organizational system designed for maximum collective service and social impact. The hidden truth is that these religious communities were often incredibly wealthy as collective entities, even while individual members owned nothing personally. The monasteries controlled vast lands, operated successful businesses, developed advanced technologies, and accumulated resources specifically to fund their mission of service, education, and spiritual development. Their poverty was strategic, not pathological, a conscious choice to channel resources toward community goals rather than individual accumulation. What made this system work was that it was carefully articulated as an integral way of life, oriented toward collective service, not a punishment or a sign of spiritual superiority. The monks and nuns who took vows of poverty did so within a supportive framework that provided security, purpose, and meaningful work. They weren't struggling to pay rent or wondering where their next meal would come from. They were liberated from financial concerns to focus entirely on their spiritual mission. This is radically different from the modern poverty that affects millions of people today, which has absolutely nothing to do with spiritual advancement or conscious choice. Most people living in financial limitation haven't chosen it as a spiritual path. They're dragging structural conditions, inherited traumas, and unconscious programming that keeps them trapped in cycles of scarcity and survival mode. The devastating impact of conflating these two completely different phenomena is that it allows society to spiritualize economic injustice, suggesting that there's somehow virtue in forcing people to struggle financially when they lack the resources, education, or opportunities to create different circumstances. There's no virtue in this forced poverty, only suffering, exclusion, and The tragic waste of human potential, this false equation between modern financial struggle and ancient spiritual practice, creates a psychological trap where people actually resist improving their economic circumstances because they've been conditioned to believe that their limitation somehow makes them more pure or spiritually advanced. They unconsciously maintain poverty as a form of identity rather than recognizing it as a condition that can and should be transformed. The journey toward authentic spiritual and financial integration requires distinguishing clearly between conscious renunciation that serves a higher purpose and unconscious limitation that serves no one. True spiritual poverty was always a choice made from a position of understanding and support, not a circumstance imposed by trauma, ignorance, or systemic disadvantage. When you understand this distinction, you can begin to see how the contemporary spiritual poverty archetype is actually a distortion of ancient wisdom rather than an expression of it. The original practitioners understood that material resources were necessary to support spiritual work and community service. They simply organized those resources collectively rather than individually. This revelation transforms your relationship with money from one of guilt and resistance to one of conscious stewardship and strategic thinking. You can pursue financial abundance without feeling like you're betraying spiritual principles, because you understand that resources in the hands of conscious people become tools for service rather than objects of attachment. The modern challenge isn't to avoid money, but to develop the consciousness necessary to handle it responsibly, using financial empowerment to support your highest values rather than allowing it to corrupt your intentions or distract you from your purpose. Now, I want to explore how this integrated understanding of spirituality and abundance connects to the quantum mechanics of manifestation, because when you align your financial goals with genuine service, the universe begins to respond in ways that seem almost magical, but are actually following precise energetic laws. Write in the comments, conscious stewardship. If you're ready to embrace financial abundance as a tool for service, rather than seeing poverty as a spiritual virtue, the psychological dynamics that keep people financially limited go far beyond individual beliefs or personal programming. There's actually a hidden alliance with mediocrity that operates at the group level, creating invisible but incredibly powerful barriers to economic advancement. One of the most devastating discoveries you can make on your transformation journey is recognizing how unconscious loyalty to limiting environments has been sabotaging your financial growth in ways you never imagined. The hidden truth is that most social groups, including families, friend circles, and professional communities, unconsciously function as homeostatic systems designed to maintain equilibrium. When someone within the group begins to advance significantly beyond the established norm, the group automatically activates corrective mechanisms to bring that person back into alignment with the collective comfort zone. This isn't conscious malice, it's an unconscious survival strategy that treats individual advancement as a potential threat to group cohesion. The impact of this dynamic is that your environment literally penalizes success, not through obvious criticism or direct confrontation, but through subtle social pressure, emotional withdrawal, or the creation of situations that make advancement feel uncomfortable or unsafe. You might notice that when you share exciting opportunities or financial wins, the response from your closest circle feels lukewarm, skeptical, or even subtly discouraging. Over time, these responses train you to keep your ambitions small to maintain social harmony. What makes this pattern particularly insidious is that it creates a double psychological trap that most people never consciously recognize. On one side, the group sanctions those who progress too far beyond the accepted boundaries through mechanisms like gossip, exclusion, or labeling them as arrogant or materialistic. On the other side, the individual lives in constant fear of losing the affection, identity, and sense of belonging that the group represents, creating what can only be described as strategic paralysis. This paralysis manifests in countless ways that seem perfectly rational on the surface. You might find yourself turning down opportunities that feel too ambitious, undercharging for your services to stay relatable, or deliberately downplaying your achievements to avoid triggering envy or resentment. Each individual decision appears reasonable, but collectively they create a pattern of systematic self-limitation designed to preserve your position within the group hierarchy. The psychological complexity of this dynamic is that it exploits your deepest human need for connection and belonging. Your nervous system is wired to prioritize social survival over individual advancement, which means that when these two drives come into conflict, belonging almost always wins. You'll unconsciously choose familiar limitation over unfamiliar expansion if expanding means risking rejection from the people whose approval you've learned to depend on for emotional security. This creates what researchers call loyalty to limitation, an unconscious commitment to staying small enough that you don't threaten the group's shared identity or force them to confront their own unrealized potential. The tragedy is that many of the most talented, creative, and capable people in our society are operating under these invisible restraints, keeping their gifts safely contained within socially acceptable boundaries. The journey toward breaking free from this alliance with mediocrity requires developing what can only be called emotional sovereignty, the ability to maintain your sense of worth and identity independent of group approval. This doesn't mean becoming antisocial or abandoning your relationships, but it does mean recognizing when loyalty to others is actually betrayal of your own potential. Understanding this dynamic is crucial because it explains why so many people who seem to have all the tools for success continue to struggle financially. They're not lacking skills, knowledge, or opportunities. They're unconsciously honoring an invisible contract that requires them to remain within the economic comfort zone of their social environment. Now, I want to reveal how this social programming intersects with your internal language patterns to create an even more sophisticated system of self-limitation, because the words you use to think about money and success are literally programming your nervous system to accept or reject financial abundance at the cellular level. Write in the comments, "I choose expansion over belonging," if you're recognizing how group loyalty has been limiting your financial potential and you're ready to honor your growth, even when it means outgrowing familiar social boundaries. The alliance with mediocrity becomes even more complex and emotionally charged when it manifests within family systems, creating what can only be described as family economic imposture. This is where prospering family members feel obligated to hide their financial success, share their income disproportionately, or even feign economic difficulties to avoid making parents or siblings feel uncomfortable about their own financial circumstances. The hidden truth is that this isn't really economic imposture at all. It's affective imposture, a form of emotional dishonesty designed to preserve family harmony at the cost of authentic expression and healthy boundaries. You might find yourself downplaying a promotion, hiding a successful investment, or refusing to upgrade your lifestyle even when you can afford it, simply because you don't want to trigger feelings of inadequacy or resentment in family members who are struggling financially. The psychological impact of this dynamic is devastating because it forces you to live a divided life where your public financial identity bears no resemblance to your actual economic reality. You become skilled at managing other people's emotions about your success rather than learning to manage your own relationship with abundance. This emotional labor exhausts your capacity for growth because so much energy goes into maintaining the fiction that you're not really succeeding. What makes this pattern particularly insidious is that it's often reinforced by well-meaning family members who unconsciously manipulate your success to manage their own financial insecurities. They might make comments about how money changes people, express concern about you becoming materialistic, or share stories about wealthy individuals who lost their values. These seemingly caring observations are actually attempts to keep you emotionally available as a peer, rather than allowing you to evolve beyond the family's economic comfort zone. This family-level programming intersects powerfully with broader cultural mythology that has been systematically conditioning entire societies to accept financial limitation as virtue. Perhaps no belief has been more destructive to human financial potential than the sanctification of effort, the deeply embedded conviction that only what costs sweat, suffering, and struggle has real value. This mythology didn't emerge naturally from human experience. It's a historical construction that consolidated during the industrial era when factory owners needed workers to accept brutal conditions and long hours as necessary and virtuous. The cultural narrative that emerged equated moral worth with physical exhaustion, teaching people that ease, efficiency, or enjoyment in work was somehow suspect or undeserving. The impact of this programming is that millions of people unconsciously reject opportunities that feel too easy, charge less than their worth because the work feels natural to them, or create unnecessary complications in their business or career because success without struggle feels illegitimate. They've been trained to equate value with difficulty rather than with results, impact, or transformation created. This effort mythology becomes particularly destructive when combined with spiritual conditioning, creating people who believe that if they're not suffering for their money, they're somehow not earning it honestly. They unconsciously add stress, complexity, and difficulty to their financial lives because the programming demands that wealth feel hard-won rather than naturally flowing. The hidden consequence of this belief system is that it prevents people from recognizing and developing their natural gifts, the areas where they could create tremendous value with relative ease and enjoyment. Instead of leveraging their strengths, they focus on their struggles, believing that the areas where they have to work hardest are somehow more virtuous or valuable than their innate talents. Breaking free from effort sanctification requires recognizing that value creation and personal satisfaction can coexist, that charging appropriately for work that feels natural to you is not only legitimate, but necessary for sustainable success. The goal isn't to avoid all effort, but to distinguish between meaningful work that energizes you and pointless struggle that depletes you without creating proportional value. Now, I want to explore how these cultural and family patterns combine with neuroplasticity principles to either lock in limitation or accelerate transformation, because understanding how your brain actually changes in response to new financial experiences reveals the precise mechanisms for reprogramming your relationship with money at the deepest level. Write in the comments, value without struggle, if you're ready to release the belief that you have to suffer for your money and embrace creating wealth through your natural gifts and talents. The research that completely demolishes the effort sanctification mythology is now overwhelming and impossible to ignore. Recent productivity studies conducted across multiple industries and countries reveal something that should fundamentally transform how we think about work and value creation. Extensive workdays not only don't increase performance, they actually reduce it cumulatively over time. This isn't a minor effect. It's a dramatic decline that affects every aspect of cognitive function and creative output. The World Health Organization has documented that work weeks exceeding 50 hours are consistently associated with decreased cognitive performance, impaired decision-making abilities, and significant mental health deterioration. What this means is that the cultural mythology celebrating overwork and endless effort is literally making people less productive, less creative, and less capable of generating real value. The harder they work within this flawed paradigm, the worse their results become. The hidden truth is that most people are trapped in what can only be called sterile sacrifice, effort that perpetuates itself through inertia, external validation needs, or conditioned identity rather than producing meaningful results. This type of work generates exhaustion without growth, activity without progress, and the illusion of productivity without actual value creation. People become addicted to being busy because the cultural programming has taught them that busyness equals worthiness. The transformation begins when you learn to distinguish between meaningful effort and sterile sacrifice. Meaningful effort arises from conscious choice, aligned with clear vision and precise purpose. It's energizing rather than depleting because it's connected to something larger than mere survival or social approval. When you're engaged in meaningful effort, time seems to expand. Challenges feel invigorating rather than overwhelming, and results compound exponentially rather than declining through exhaustion. Sterile sacrifice, on the other hand, feels heavy, repetitive, and draining because it's not connected to authentic purpose or clear outcomes. It's effort for effort's sake, work that exists primarily to fulfill programming about what productive people are supposed to do, rather than what actually needs to be accomplished. This type of activity can consume years of someone's life without producing any significant advancement in their circumstances or contribution to the world. The psychological complexity of this pattern is that sterile sacrifice often feels virtuous to the person trapped within it. They can point to their long hours, their exhaustion, their constant activity as evidence of their dedication and worthiness. But meanwhile, people who work with greater intelligence, efficiency, and strategic focus are creating dramatically better results with less total effort, often triggering resentment from those stuck in the sacrifice mythology. Breaking free from this pattern requires developing what can be called effort intelligence, the ability to distinguish between work that compounds and work that merely repeats. Effort intelligence means asking different questions about your activities. Does this create value that builds on itself? Does this align with my larger vision? Does this energize or drain my capacity for future contribution? Does this require my unique talents, or could it be done more efficiently by someone else or through different systems? The journey toward financial abundance becomes dramatically accelerated when you stop measuring your worth by how hard you work and start measuring it by how much value you create. This shift allows you to focus your limited energy on high-leverage activities that produce compounding results, rather than scattering your attention across busy work that creates the appearance of productivity without the substance. Understanding this distinction is crucial because it reveals why so many people remain financially limited despite working incredibly hard. They're operating within a framework that actually sabotages efficiency and creativity in favor of effort display, ensuring that their hard work produces minimal advancement in their actual circumstances. Now I want to reveal how this understanding of effort intelligence connects to the quantum mechanics of financial manifestation, because when you align your work with natural energy patterns rather than fighting against them through forced effort, money begins to flow with an ease that seems almost magical, but follows precise universal principles. Write in the comments, "Working smarter, not harder," if you're ready to release the addiction to struggle, and start creating wealth through intelligent, purposeful action rather than exhausting, busy work. The transformation from effort-based thinking to intelligent value creation opens up what can only be described as the quantum territory of potential abundance, a region of reality that operates according to completely different principles than the mechanical, linear cause and effect relationships most people assume govern financial success. This isn't mystical speculation, it's cutting edge. Science that reveals how consciousness itself participates in creating the reality we experience. There exists a realm where traditional accounting formulas and logical predictions break down completely, where probabilities oscillate in response to observation, and where consciousness literally modifies observed outcomes in measurable ways. Quantum physics has demonstrated beyond any doubt that humans aren't passive spectators waiting for external circumstances to determine their financial fate. We're active agents whose awareness, expectations, and focus actually influence which possibilities manifest into physical reality. The hidden truth that most people never grasp is that the observer effect documented in quantum laboratories operates constantly in daily life, including in financial situations. Reality isn't the solid, definitive structure we were taught to believe it is. Instead, it's a field of infinite potentialities that only become actualized through specific acts of observation and attention. This means your consciousness doesn't simply echo existing financial facts. It actively selects one possibility among multiple potential realities. What makes this revelation so profound for wealth creation is that it explains why two people with identical skills, education, and opportunities can have completely different financial outcomes. They're literally operating from different quantum territories, observing and therefore actualizing entirely different sets of possibilities. One person's consciousness is calibrated to notice scarcity, limitation, and problems, while another's is tuned to recognize abundance, opportunity, and solutions. The practical application of this understanding is that your financial reality responds not just to your actions, but to the quality of attention you bring to money, opportunities, and value creation. When you observe financial situations with anxiety, lack, and fear, you're literally collapsing the quantum field toward manifestations that confirm those expectations. When you observe with confidence, abundance consciousness, and strategic thinking, you activate different potentials that most people never access. This isn't positive thinking or wishful visualization. It's a precise understanding of how consciousness interfaces with material reality at the quantum level. Your brain's reticular activating system, the filter that determines what information reaches your conscious awareness, literally reshapes your perceived reality based on your dominant expectations and beliefs about money. The journey toward quantum-level financial transformation requires learning to sustain coherent attention on abundance possibilities rather than scarcity probabilities. This means training your consciousness to consistently observe opportunities rather than obstacles, to notice value creation possibilities rather than limitation, and to maintain energetic alignment with prosperity rather than struggle. Most people sabotage their quantum manifestation abilities by oscillating between different financial realities throughout the day. They might visualize abundance for 10 minutes in the morning, then spend the rest of their time thinking, speaking, and acting from scarcity consciousness. This inconsistency cancels out the quantum effects because the field responds to sustained coherence, not occasional intensity. Understanding quantum financial manifestation reveals why traditional goal setting and action planning, while useful, often produce limited results. They operate entirely within the realm of known possibilities and linear causation, missing the non-linear realm where consciousness creates circumstances that seem to appear out of nowhere but actually emerge from sustained attention to specific quantum territories. The transformation accelerates dramatically when you learn to inhabit the feeling state of already having achieved your financial goals, not as fantasy or escape, but as quantum positioning. This shifts your consciousness into territories where those realities already exist as potentials waiting to be actualized through sustained coherent observation. Now, I want to explore how this quantum understanding intersects with neuroplasticity to create permanent rewiring of your financial programming. Because when you combine consciousness-directed reality selection with brain-changing techniques, you access levels of transformation that seem impossible from conventional perspectives. Write in the comments, "Quantum consciousness activated," if you're ready to move beyond linear financial planning and start working with the deeper laws that govern how consciousness creates material reality. The most crucial insight about quantum financial manifestation is understanding that the quantum field responds to vibrational coherence rather than occasional intensity. This means that sporadic moments of powerful visualization or intense positive thinking, while potentially inspiring, pale in comparison to the transformational power of sustained, consistent alignment with abundance consciousness throughout your daily experience. The hidden truth is that it's the constancy of choice, not its spectacularity, that actually displaces one reality line for another through persistent, selective direction. Most people approach financial transformation like they're trying to move a massive boulder with occasional bursts of tremendous effort, when what's actually required is the steady, consistent pressure that gradually shifts entire landscapes over time. This principle explains why people who meditate on abundance for 20 minutes each morning but spend the remaining hours thinking, speaking, and acting from scarcity consciousness rarely see lasting financial improvement. Their brief moments of quantum alignment are immediately cancelled out by hours of contradictory mental activity that reinforces the old reality patterns they're trying to escape. The transformation accelerates when you learn to maintain what can be called background abundance consciousness, a consistent underlying assumption that opportunities, resources, and positive outcomes are naturally available to you. This isn't about forcing positive thoughts or denying challenges, but about shifting your default energetic frequency to one that resonates with prosperity rather than limitation. Understanding quantum consistency reveals why sustainable financial transformation requires working at the level of neuroplasticity to literally rewire your brain's automatic responses to money and opportunity. The fascinating discovery is that every significant economic experience you've ever had is stored not as objective data, but as subjective narrative charged with intense emotion and identity implications. Your hippocampus, the brain region responsible for memory formation, doesn't archive financial experiences neutrally. Instead, it assigns special priority to economically emotional events, treating them as key reference points for all future financial decisions. This means that a childhood experience of financial stress, an early career rejection, or a business failure doesn't just become a memory. It becomes a template that your nervous system uses to predict and respond to similar future situations. The hidden consequence of this neurological process is that your adult financial behavior is largely determined by emotional memories that may have nothing to do with your current circumstances, skills, or opportunities. You might unconsciously avoid certain types of investments because they trigger neural pathways associated with past disappointment, or you might systematically undercharge for your services because childhood programming equated asking for money with causing stress in your family. What makes this particularly complex is that these emotional financial memories often operate completely below conscious awareness. You're not thinking about past experiences when you make present-day financial decisions. You're simply feeling vague anxiety, excitement, fear, or confidence without understanding that these emotions are actually echoes from your neurologically stored economic past. The journey toward financial freedom requires not just changing your thinking, but actually rewriting these emotional memories at the cellular level where they're stored. This process, known as memory reconsolidation, allows you to access old financial traumas and literally update them with new information, deactivating their emotional charge and freeing your nervous system to respond to current reality rather than historical programming. The transformation becomes permanent when you combine quantum consciousness techniques with neuroplasticity practices that systematically reprogram your brain's financial operating system. Instead of fighting against decades of conditioning with willpower and positive thinking, you actually update the source code that generates your automatic responses to money, value, and opportunity. Now, I want to reveal the specific neuroplasticity protocols that can rapidly rewrite your financial programming while simultaneously demonstrating how to maintain the quantum coherence necessary for accessing higher probability fields of abundance. Because when these two approaches work together, transformation happens at speeds that seem impossible from conventional perspectives. Write in the comments, "Rewiring my financial brain," if you're ready to go beyond surface-level mindset work and actually change your neurological programming at the deepest level where lasting transformation occurs. The process of memory reconsolidation represents one of the most powerful breakthroughs in neuroscience for understanding how we can literally rewrite our financial programming at the cellular level. Neural plasticity allows emotional memory circuits to be modified through correct reconsolidation activation, which means your brain has the capacity to update old financial memories by reinserting new information during memory evocation, effectively deactivating the automatic emotional responses that have been sabotaging your financial success. The hidden truth is that every time you recall a financially emotional memory, that memory becomes temporarily unstable and open to modification. During this brief window of neuroplasticity, you can actually insert new information, perspectives, and emotional associations that permanently alter how that memory affects your future financial decisions. This isn't visualization or positive thinking, it's a precise neurological process that allows you to heal financial trauma at its source. What makes this particularly powerful for wealth creation is that most people's financial limitations stem from a handful of key emotional memories that continue to influence their adult behavior decades after the original events occurred. By systematically identifying and reconsolidating these memories, you can eliminate the unconscious programming that's been creating financial self-sabotage throughout your life. The transformation happens when you learn to access these charged financial memories in a controlled, safe environment and consciously reframe them with adult wisdom, current resources, and empowered perspective. Instead of remaining trapped by a 6-year-old's understanding of money and security, you can update those memories with your current knowledge and capabilities, freeing your nervous system to respond to present opportunities rather than past limitations. But memory reconsolidation is only one layer of the neuroplasticity work required for complete financial transformation. Equally important is understanding how your internal language patterns continuously shape your relationship with money and value creation. The hidden truth is that every relationship with money is mediated by invisible language. The ongoing discourse a person sustains about themselves internally that most people never consciously examine. This internal language doesn't just accompany your thoughts about money, it actively structures, molds, and directs them in ways that either expand or contract your financial possibilities. The words you use to describe yourself, your capabilities, your worth, and your relationship with money are literally programming your nervous system to either attract or repel financial abundance. The fascinating discovery is that most people's internal financial dialogue is filled with limiting language patterns inherited from childhood programming, family beliefs, and cultural conditioning. They might think thoughts like, "I'm not good with money," "I don't deserve that much," or "rich people are greedy," without realizing that these seemingly innocent self-talk patterns are actually commands that their subconscious mind follows with remarkable precision. The transformation accelerates when you become conscious of this internal language and systematically replace limiting patterns with empowering alternatives that align with your financial goals. This isn't about forcing positive affirmations that feel false, but about identifying the specific language patterns that have been constraining your financial growth and consciously evolving them to support expansion rather than limitation. Understanding the power of internal language reveals why traditional financial education often fails to create lasting change. You can learn all the investment strategies and money management techniques in the world, but if your internal dialogue continues to reinforce unworthiness, scarcity, or fear around money, those limiting language patterns will sabotage your best efforts through unconscious self-sabotage. Now, I want to explore how these internal language patterns intersect with value perception to either enhance or diminish your ability to charge appropriately for your services and attract the financial abundance you truly deserve, because the way you talk to yourself about your worth directly determines how the world responds to your value. Write in the comments, upgrading my money language. If you're ready to become conscious of your internal financial dialogue and systematically reprogram it to support wealth creation rather than limitation, the power of internal language becomes even more profound when you understand how metaphorical thinking literally shapes your neural responses to financial situations. When someone says, "I'm drowning in debt," they're not being poetic or dramatic. They're actually activating the exact same neural networks associated with physical sinking, suffocation, and breathing impossibility. Their brain responds to this metaphor as if it were describing a real physical threat, triggering stress responses that make clear thinking and strategic problem-solving nearly impossible. The hidden truth is that changing your financial metaphors immediately changes how your nervous system processes money challenges and how actively it seeks solutions versus how desperately it avoids the situation altogether. If debt feels like drowning, your brain will focus on survival and escape rather than strategic planning. But if debt becomes temporary leverage that I'm systematically reducing, your neural networks activate problem-solving patterns rather than panic responses. This metaphorical programming extends far beyond individual thinking patterns into what can only be described as collective belief system contagion. The way scarcity consciousness spreads through entire cultures like a virus, infecting people's financial possibilities before they even have a chance to develop their own relationship with money. The fascinating and disturbing reality is that scarcity transmits through collective normalized belief networks that configure what entire societies consider sensible, realistic, or inevitable about financial life. Media, popular sayings, movies, and advertising function as primary vectors of this mimetic diffusion, constantly reinforcing the same limiting beliefs about money across millions of minds simultaneously. Every movie that portrays wealthy people as villains, every song that glorifies struggle, every advertisement that promises happiness through consumption while reinforcing the belief that real abundance is for other people. All of these seemingly innocent cultural messages are actually programming your subconscious mind to accept financial limitation as normal and appropriate. The impact of this collective programming is that most people never even attempt to create significant wealth because the cultural narrative has convinced them it's either impossible for someone like them or morally suspect to even desire. They've absorbed so many stories about money being scarce, difficult to obtain, or corrupting that they unconsciously collaborate with their own financial limitation to stay safely within the boundaries of what their social environment considers acceptable. What makes this cultural programming particularly insidious is that it operates through repetition rather than evidence. You don't consciously evaluate whether the beliefs about money you've absorbed from your culture are true. You simply accept them as background reality because you've heard them thousands of times from sources you trust. The repetition creates the illusion of truth, even when the beliefs being repeated are demonstrably false or destructive. Breaking free from collective belief contagion requires developing what can be called cultural immunity, the ability to recognize when societal narratives are programming your mind in ways that don't serve your highest potential. This means becoming conscious of the financial messages you're absorbing daily through entertainment, news, social media, and casual conversation, and making deliberate choices about which narratives you allow to influence your thinking. The transformation accelerates when you realize that most people around you are unconsciously repeating financial beliefs that were programmed into them by the same cultural sources that have been limiting your own potential. Their seemingly rational concerns about money are often just culturally transmitted fears that have no basis in their actual experience or current opportunities. Now, I want to reveal how to create a systematic protection protocol against this collective programming while simultaneously building new neural pathways that support conscious wealth creation, because understanding the sources of financial limitation is only useful if you know how to actively construct alternatives that serve your authentic goals. Write in the comments, cultural immunity activated, if you're recognizing how societal programming has been shaping your financial beliefs and you're ready to consciously choose which money narratives influence your thinking. The process of mimetic information transmission reveals just how systematically our collective financial consciousness has been engineered to accept limitation as natural law. Memes, in the original scientific sense, are thought structures that replicate through imitation and repetition, spreading from mind to mind like biological viruses. When ideas like money changes people or money is the root of all evil repeat thousands of times across different formats, movies, songs, conversations, social media posts, they install themselves in the collective mind as axioms rather than hypotheses that should be tested against actual evidence. The hidden truth is that most people have never consciously examined whether the financial beliefs they carry are based on their own experience or simply on cultural memes they've absorbed through repetition. They might have never personally witnessed money corrupting someone, but because they've heard this narrative so many times, they accept it as inevitable truth and unconsciously organize their financial choices around avoiding this imaginary danger. This mimetic programming becomes particularly destructive because it operates below conscious awareness while powerfully influencing behavior. Someone might consciously want financial freedom, but unconsciously sabotage every opportunity for wealth creation because their deeper mind has been programmed to believe that money will somehow change them into someone their family and friends won't recognize or accept. Breaking free from mimetic financial programming requires recognizing that most collective beliefs about money are not based on universal truths, but on ideas that have been artificially amplified through repetition and social reinforcement. The beliefs that dominate our culture aren't necessarily the most accurate or useful ones. They're simply the ones that have been most successfully transmitted and replicated across minds. But understanding the sources of financial limitation is only the beginning of true transformation. Adult financial transformation requires moving beyond healing, understanding, and consciousness work into active construction of wealth through practical value creation. This is where most spiritual and psychological approaches to money fall short. They focus on removing blocks and changing beliefs without providing concrete frameworks for actually generating financial abundance in the real world. The conscious wealth creation axiom states that sustainable wealth appears at the intersection of three specific elements: a value-generating identity that knows what it can offer the world, real unresolved needs in the marketplace that you have the skills to address, and functional exchange systems that allow fair compensation for value delivered. This isn't about passive affirmation accumulation or hoping the universe delivers money through mysterious means. It's about consciously constructing economic value in ways that serve both your own prosperity and the genuine needs of others. The transformation from financial struggle to abundance requires recognizing that money is simply a measurement system for value exchange between human beings. When you solve real problems for people in ways they appreciate and can afford, money flows naturally as a byproduct of that service. The key is developing what can be called value creation consciousness, the ability to consistently identify needs you can address and deliver solutions that justify fair compensation. This approach bypasses most of the psychological and spiritual complications around money by focusing on contribution rather than acquisition. Instead of asking, "How can I get more money?" you start asking, "What value can I create that people need and are willing to pay for?" This shift in focus eliminates the guilt, manipulation, and spiritual confusion that plague most approaches to wealth building. Understanding conscious wealth creation reveals why so many talented, conscious people remain financially limited despite their good intentions and spiritual development. They've been conditioned to see money as something that should come to them through grace, luck, or cosmic reward for their goodness, rather than as the natural result of systematically creating value for others through their unique gifts and capabilities. Now, I want to explore the specific mechanics of how to identify your unique value creation potential and translate it into sustainable income streams that align with both your highest purpose and practical financial goals. Because bridging the gap between spiritual consciousness and practical wealth building is where true financial freedom becomes possible. Write in the comments, "Ready to create value," if you're shifting from hoping money will come to you to actively building wealth through conscious contribution to others' needs and challenges. The three-factor wealth circuit represents the most practical framework for understanding how conscious financial abundance actually manifests in the real world. Sustainable wealth generation requires the integration of three specific elements: internalized subjective value, which means developing absolute clarity about what unique gifts, knowledge, and capabilities you can offer to others. Objective external problem solution, which involves translating that internal value into practical, desirable forms that address real needs people are experiencing. And ethical, sustained circulation, which creates just, scalable, and mutually enriching exchange mechanisms that benefit everyone involved. The hidden truth is that most people struggle financially because they're missing one or more of these three essential components. Some individuals have tremendous internal value, deep knowledge, creative gifts, or healing abilities, but they've never learned how to translate those gifts into practical solutions that others can easily understand and access. Others excel at identifying market needs and creating solutions, but they lack clarity about their own unique value proposition, so they end up competing in crowded markets instead of leveraging their distinctive strengths. Still, others master both internal value and external problem-solving, but fail to create ethical circulation systems, either undercharging for their contributions or building business models that aren't sustainable long-term. The magic happens when all three factors align simultaneously, creating what can only be described as a value creation engine that generates wealth as a natural byproduct of serving others effectively. Understanding this circuit reveals why traditional approaches to wealth building often feel forced, manipulative, or unsustainable. When you're trying to make money without genuine value creation, or when you're solving problems that aren't connected to your authentic gifts, the process feels exhausting and often produces mediocre results. But when your internal value, external problem-solving, and circulation systems align, wealth creation becomes energizing rather than draining, because you're operating in harmony with your natural strengths and market needs. This brings us to perhaps the most profound understanding of wealth that exists in human consciousness. The recognition that authentic financial abundance isn't artificial excess or accumulation for its own sake, but rather the natural consequence of aligning with what ancient wisdom traditions called the logos, the intelligent organizing principle that governs universal creation. When your financial activities remain aligned with this deeper order, they tend to grow and expand not from egoic desire or manipulation, but according to structural laws that govern all sustainable systems. Wealth, when properly understood and consciously created, becomes visible testimony of correctly channeled flow rather than evidence of greed or spiritual compromise. Just as rivers naturally carve deeper channels when their flow is unobstructed, financial abundance flows more freely when your value creation activities align with universal principles of service, integrity, and mutual benefit. The transformation into this level of conscious wealth creation requires recognizing that money is not separate from spiritual law, but actually operates according to the same principles that govern all manifestation in the universe. What serves the highest good and creates genuine value for others naturally attracts resources because the logos itself supports activities that enhance life and consciousness rather than diminishing them. If you've made it this far with me through this deep exploration of financial consciousness and wealth reprogramming, you're clearly someone who's serious about transformation. Most people would have clicked away long ago, but you stayed because something in this message resonated with your deeper knowing about what's possible for your financial life. The journey we've taken together, from uncovering the hidden programming that's been limiting your prosperity to understanding the quantum mechanics of conscious wealth creation, represents just the beginning of what's available when you commit to rewiring your relationship with money at the deepest level. This isn't surface-level motivation, it's the foundation for lasting financial transformation that aligns with your highest values. If content like this serves your growth, and you want to continue receiving insights that bridge spirituality, psychology, and practical wealth building, I'd love to have you subscribe to the channel. What we've covered today barely scratches the surface of what's possible when you understand how consciousness, neuroscience, and financial abundance work together. Take a moment to hit that like button if this conversation created something valuable for you. There's real energy in that simple action. It tells me that this message found the right person at the right time, and it helps ensure that more people who need this information will discover it. And if you're someone who genuinely made it all the way through this exploration, write in the comments, "This message was meant for me." I read every comment, and there's something powerful about declaring your commitment to this path of conscious financial transformation. Before you go, there's a video right here that takes this conversation even deeper into the practical mechanics of implementing these consciousness shifts in your daily financial decisions. Click and continue with me over there, because the real transformation happens when you move from understanding to application.